In response to the Israeli attack against Iran overnight, Iran today is threatening an open declaration of war, is how they have termed what has happened to them. They are vowing to respond in a strong manner. They say at a time and place that they're choosing, it will be very strong and very powerful. There have been huge marches inside of Iran in solidarity with the government, being upset at the attack that they've suffered. You know, as so often happens in situations like this, there is so much internal dispute and strife inside of Iran. There's so many people that have been against their government, etc. These are one of the kinds of things that will draw everyone together. Instead of pushing them further apart or making it more likely that the regime is toppled from within, these kinds of things at least have an initial impact of ending all of the disputes and rallying around the flag kind of a situation. And you literally physically see there all the flags that are being rallied around. The real question is going to be, what is going to happen next? Even from the Israeli side, from what's been said, this was not a one-off situation, but a campaign. So presumably more is coming, even in their what may be considered eventually is the initial phase of this operation. Then, of course, the big issue is, what is Iran going to do? And what are their capabilities? And what has happened? What has been the result so far of these strikes from Israel into Iran? We're starting to get some clarification. We came on to, in the first moments this happened last night, a lot of things we didn't know. The sun had still not come up. We didn't know exactly how much damage had been done. Now we're getting some more clarification. There's still a lot we don't know, but there's a lot that we do know. So let me bring you up to date about what we know so far, what has happened, and then we're going to give you some pretty good ideas about what may be coming next and what is some of the real risks for the United States. And that's, of course, always my priority here, not about what Israel does or doesn't do, but how this impacts our country. Lots of moving pieces here. So let's go ahead and get started. We started last night with telling you about what Netanyahu had said. Well, today we want to start with what the Iranian president has had to say in his first response.
نیمه شب گذشته شاهد تجاوز وحشیانه رژیم جنایتکار صهیونیستی به تهران و شهرهای دیگر از کشور بودیم که منجر به شهادت تعدادی از کودکان و زنان، جمعی از شهروندان بیگناه، فرماندهان نظامی و دانشمندان هسته‌ای شد. این اقدام سبعانه که برخلاف همه تعهدات بین المللی بود، مؤید خوی جنایتکارانه رژیم نامشروع صهیونیستی است که موجودیت خود را بر پایه اشغال و تجاوز و کودک کشی بنا نهاده است. تجاوز شب گذشته به همه جهانیان حقانیت ادعای چندین و چند ساله جمهوری اسلامی ایران مبنی بر این که تجاوز و جنایت با ذات رژیم صهیونیستی عجین بوده را اثبات کرد. البته ملت ایران و مسئولان کشور در برابر این جنایت سکوت نخواهند کرد و پاسخ مشروع و قدرتمند جمهوری اسلامی ایران دشمن را از اقدام احمقانه خود پشیمان خواهد کرد.
So he says a powerful response is coming. Now let's take a listen to this, or consider some of the things he said there, and let's see, do they line up with truth, or is this just something they're spouting from their side? And Netanyahu said what he wanted from his side, and maybe neither one of them were close to being right. He just conveys the side of their persons there. Let's take a look at the one thing, because there is some stuff that should concern us all. First of all, he claimed there that this was an illegal act, that it violates international law. So there is the United Nations Charter, and I want to say it's Article 51 that gives the right of every nation to self-defense. Israel is claiming that this was an act of self-defense, a preemptive strike, they called it. Some of their official leaders have said in public that this was a preemptive action, i.e., they felt that they were going to be attacked, and so they preempted it by attacking instead. But that's getting into, I mean, you're literally just playing with the law at this point. Words don't make any difference, because there was no evidence that Iran, in fact, we have expressly said, American intelligence has said that there has not been a decision to even go for a nuclear weapon, much less had they started one that was in the process of going to attack Israel. Now, some of the Israeli leaders, I think we showed you in our show last night, have claimed that they had intelligence that said that Iran was building a bomb, but then they said they assume that they were going to actually weaponized it. So kind of contradictory, even in the confines of their own statement that has happened. So it doesn't appear that there's any actual evidence that Iran was going to do this that would have necessitated a strike, because it's not even enough to say, well, they had some evidence that Iran was going to start making a nuclear weapon. I think that would be a bad situation. It would be a dangerous precedent. But going to a nuclear weapon is not evidence that you're going to build one in order to attack someone else, from which you need a preemptive strike, which means then that the preponderance of evidence says that Israel just, and we've been telling you about this for many, many months, they've been trying to go after the, quote, head of the octopus for a long, long time. And they took, as Naftali Bennett, former prime minister, put it, a once in a 50-year opportunity to finally go after their nemesis and take them out. We showed you, and I want to say it was in October of 2024, where Bennett was interviewed, and one of the interviewers actually asked him point blank, well, if the United States doesn't join in with you, will you do this by yourself? And he said it would be more difficult, but yeah, we would do it. So now it appears that they have made good on that. When the Trump administration came in, we saw all kinds of evidence that they were putting significant pressure on Trump to actually join with them in doing that. It looked like he was close to doing it in March of this year. We've shown you that clip several times, where from the Oval Office, Trump said, hey, we're in the final stages, folks. We're in the last strokes before something's going to happen. If Iran doesn't do what we say, there will be bombing and all this kind of stuff. Then it looked like he backed off of that and started going towards diplomacy again. And the New York Times has said that it may have been Tulsi Gabbard may have been among some of those few internal people that talked about the consequences that could befall the United States if we participated in a war. That seemed to have had some impact on the president, and then he went towards negotiations. Those started to look like they were going to have some possibility. It actually had some traction. But then came here lately, it looked like Netanyahu again put more pressure on the White House, on Trump specifically, and then he added a red line that Iran, the only negotiated end to this would be zero processing capacity for Tehran, which Tehran had said, that's a non-negotiable for us. We won't go that far. We'll go this other far. We'll negotiate here. Here's the thing you need to understand about negotiations, folks. I keep saying this all the time, but it bears repeating again, because it doesn't seem like the message is getting through to the White House anyway. If you want to get something in negotiations, you got to give something. Otherwise, it's not negotiation. Otherwise, it's I've got a gun to your head and I'll kill you if you don't do what I tell you to do. That's not negotiations, folks. That's just a threat. That's an ultimatum. And it appears that that was what was issued here, that basically Iran was told to either comply with everything we're telling you, or they'll be bombing. And now we see that that's what has happened. And so you get back again to the legality of it. Can a state, because they feel it's once in a 50-year opportunity, and they think that some hypothetical day in the distant future, maybe this particular nation will do something that we don't like and might even attack us, so we're going to go kill them now? You don't have to. That's a rhetorical question, quite clearly, because international law does not permit that, because then there is no international law. When a nation can attack another nation because it doesn't like it, and then it can use whatever words it wants, and there is no evidence at all that they were about to be attacked by this country, then you now have the situation to where this so-called international rules-based order that we claim to want to provide, the international rule of law, simply doesn't exist. And it's so ironic and perverse, really, that we have lots of our statements from some of our leaders of late that is, in talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, says that we don't want a situation where it's the rule by might. I think it was either Ursula von der Leyen or Mark Rutte had said that. We don't want a world that's governed like that. We want a world governed by law and by the rights of countries. And then now we not only turn a blind eye, but it appears that we at least had some participation in this, or some certainly foreknowledge of it, and not only didn't do anything to stop it, congratulated it afterwards. And that stuff is, folks, is what is continuing to erode the fabric of what has long been the great power of the United States, which is moral persuasion power. And it's soft power, the ability to not just coerce, but to encourage others to to take action that we thought was beneficial to us, or to encourage them to take actions that were, there were international laws, there were international standards, at least to some degree, that we would say that everyone needs to follow this. And to some degree, in the past, at least, we have followed that. I say to a degree. I'm not naive. I'm not pretending otherwise. But now that it's like we're not even pretending, it's not even doing it a little bit. If power works for us here, we're good with it. If power doesn't work for us here and we want a different outcome there, then we'll complain about it. And what that does is it erodes your ability to influence anyone. No one's going to pay attention to you, and they're going to mock you when you try to make these moralistic claims. Anthony Blinken did it a lot during the previous administration. We called that out here too. And so now when the current crop does the same things in the Russia-Ukraine, when doing the different thing here in the Middle East, it's not going to play, folks. And it's going to mean that in the future, when we may need some soft power to encourage someone, or to use our moral persuasion to get them to take a course of action that actually would benefit them too, but that they're like, all right, well, I'll be willing to do it. There's going to be a much less likelihood that anyone is going to do anything unless it is fully in their own self-interest. And they won't do anything because we asked them to do it, because we're forfeiting that moral persuasion capability. And so there could be ramifications for what's going on right now in both of these theaters of operation for quite a long time to come. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other things here, because President Trump this morning, I'm going to get to what happened, what's been going on here in a second. Let me real quick, though, hit what President Trump, he put out a Truth Social this morning where he was talking about what was going on. And you see that this is something that he obviously had some foreknowledge about. Gary, if you can pull that full screen up there. Thank you. He said, I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest words to just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know or anticipated or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it. We're going to see how that could come back to bite us right there. But let me continue. With much more to come, and they know how to use it. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead now, and it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being even more brutal, come to an end. Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. Just do it before it's too late. And then curiously tags it out with God bless you all. Listen there, he has said we didn't know anything about this. Marco Rubio last night posted a post of his own on the State Department official website and said we had no role in this, anything else. But then you see President Trump right there on the Truth Social saying that, yeah, all of the stuff that we've sent them, all our gear is great, our missiles and rockets, we've given a lot of it to Israel and they know how to use it. So by definition, you're associated with what's happened because you enabled it. So it's odd to claim on one hand we didn't do anything, and then on the other hand, we're bragging about giving them the capacity to do this. And we obviously had foreknowledge about what was coming, because Trump knew that there was going to be some people that were going to pay with their lives. And certainly that's what's happened. Trump also mentioned in a separate Truth Social, and this was actually just a couple of hours ago, I believe, that he mentioned something he had said, and it was actually by a letter that was sent out, I think it was in March, but it was made public on, I think it was the 12th or 11th of April. And you see in his Truth Social there, he says, 2 months ago, I gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to, quote, make a deal. They should have done it. Today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance. Listen, that's another thing that could come back to bite us in the butt, because you're saying that you gave them an ultimatum. You gave them 60 days to make a deal. And when they didn't, Israel attacked. I mean, that sounds almost like you have direct coordination, not even just foreknowledge, but you're implying that it was a coordinated issue and that Israel struck on time on your deadline. And, to try to claim that we didn't do anything is to basically say we provided ammunition and weapons and we had coordination at the highest levels. We just don't want you to attack any of our people, so don't do it. I certainly hope they don't, but this is what I have been warning folks for years. Ever since we've had this channel, every time this topic comes up, I continue to say our troops in Iraq and in Syria and in Jordan, actually in many places in the Middle East, are nothing more than a strategic point of vulnerability. They have never done anything to improve American national security. We just keep sending these guys over there and these gals and putting them in harm's way for no reason. And because they're there, they can be attacked, and they've been attacked scores of times. Hundreds have been wounded over the last few years. 3 were killed in 2024. And yet every time I keep saying, get those guys out of there and end the vulnerability, because their very presence means that if Israel or if Iran wanted to do anything to us, they can, because they're there. Because I can tell you, because I served in that region, I've been on some of these really small isolated bases like what we have in many of these places, and they may have some local air defenses against Katyusha rockets or mortars or the like, or drones, but they don't have anything against ballistic missiles. Most of those bases, these smaller ones, they're completely vulnerable. And if Iran chooses to use some of their missile forces to attack our forces there, if they deem that this is in fact a full war and they act on that, then what we could find is a lot of our troops are in the crosshairs. And folks, there'll be almost nothing we can do to defend ourselves. We simply don't have that kind of air defense at every base that's scattered throughout there. This puts our troops more at risk. I cannot more strongly say, right now, all those guys are still alive. Get them out right now. Don't allow them to just be sitting ducks waiting to find out whether Iran is going to strike or not, because that is not in America's interest. And let me also, again, just categorically say, there is nothing involved with this situation here which involves American national security for which we should get involved in this. Even if Iran takes a strong counterattack and does something strong in return and actually harms Israel, we should not go to war on their behalf. Israel has very carefully calculated this. They decided what they wanted to do. They've done it. And now then they should be responsible for what happens next. It is not our war, and it should not be our war, no matter what happens. And we're going to talk in a minute with one of my defense priorities colleagues, Dr. Rose Kellick, and we'll bring her on in a minute to talk about some of that stuff, because she's got some insight about what may or may not happen with Iran. But no matter what does or doesn't happen, this is not America's fight. And let me just tell you, just imagine right now, why would you want to sacrifice one American soldier, one plane, one ship in the Red Sea or the Adriatic or the area around there anywhere, and because Israel chose to launch a war against Iran, even though they have been deterred and contained since 1979, and there was they were clearly very weakened by everything that had happened in 2024, by all of their proxies that have been damaged in Israel's war since they started following the 10/7 terrorist attacks against Israel. They were even weaker than they were before. So there was no compelling reason to go. Since Israel chose to do it anyway, though, they need to be responsible for whatever happens to their security as a result. More on that in a minute. Let's take a look, though, at what has actually happened here so far. This whole strike was actually, from a military perspective, you can't be anything but impressed with it, because Israel went in and attacked. Apparently they had some Mossad agents that were on the ground, and it was coordinated with what happened in the air. First of all, this is something that's just recently been released by the Israeli Defense Forces. Some real important things that I want to point out here. This is a graphic that they released showing how they did some of these strikes. This particular one here is the uranium enrichment site at Natanz, one of the primary targets and one of the primary places that Iran has been doing its nuclear research, etc., and where it has all these centrifuges. You see these very, very sophisticated graphics where they're showing the inside of these buildings and where these are the centrifuges. Right there is what you're seeing, where they spin these things to reprocess uranium, etc. And then Israel's going to show how they can tell, okay, I guess that was the extent of that part. And then obviously the airplanes come in and they start dropping bombs. Well, simultaneous to this, what we also had was, prior to this part of the attack, Mossad agents and several other folks on the ground infiltrated inside of Iran and were launching some strikes against some actual missile carriers. So they were actually not just taking out air defense systems before the Air Force came in there. They were actually using drones to fire inside of Iran against these targets. Apparently, that's some of the Mossad agents right there. That's a shot that was made in the dark. And then you see that the drones were coming in and hit missile carriers and air defense missiles, et cetera, to further weaken that before the planes even came in. And at least what's been reported so far, there were 200 Israeli jets that took part in this attack. They launched 360 some odd munitions, and none of them got shot down. None of the planes got shot down. Whether any of the missiles were knocked out is unknown, but there's no evidence that any of them were, because of the efforts of these guys inside was so amazing. That simulation tells you something that, and what you saw there, if you think that looks familiar, because it is, that's similar to what Ukraine did in Russia and striking their strategic bomber force a couple of weeks back. And, that was, we found out that had been 18 months in the planning, et cetera. The fact that Israel had graphics designed and produced here, and that they had these teams able to go inside of Iran, tells you that this is also something that has been planned for a long, long time. I can tell you for certain that operations of this complexity don't get done just on the fly. It's not like a target of opportunity. This is stuff that has to be rehearsed. It has to be planned. It has to be meticulously executed. And from a military perspective, this has been about as flawless of an operation as can be imagined. Now, the question is going to be, what is going to happen next? And in my view, this really comes down to one of two decisions that's going to be made inside Tehran coming up pretty soon. And probably they're being debated about right now. And that is, do they prioritize regime survival, or do they prioritize revenge? If they prioritize regime survival, then I think we can expect a modest response, because they have to do something. They literally can't do nothing. You see that their population wouldn't even, they probably wouldn't let them stay in power if they did nothing. So they have to do something. But if it's regime survival, they'll calculate it. They'll say, all right, we'll do as much as we can to not precipitate a bigger attack. They'll do what they can to make sure America stays out of it. They'll complain. They'll go to the UN Security Council and make speeches, et cetera. They'll hit something, or they'll do something, some version of what they did twice in 2024, which is fire a bunch of drones and missiles into certain areas that they calculate not to cause casualties, but that will say, all right, that will be the end of it. We won't escalate further. That's regime survival mode. If, on the other hand, they choose revenge, then they may say, we don't give a damn about whether we survive anymore. We're just not going to give in. So we're going to go in hard and heavy. And then we're going to get into what that may mean with Iran. But that's when they may be willing to expand the war. They may be willing to take it to the American troops in the region and to hit our assets and several other kinds of things. Let's see if we have, is Rose here with us? I think she may be here with us. There is Rose. Good to see you. Thank you very much for coming on. I know you're very much in demand right now. Director of Middle East Program here at Defense Priorities. And really grateful to have you on, Rose. First of all, just welcome to the show. We haven't had you on before.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. I'm really excited to be here, but I wish the circumstances were different, obviously.
I did. I actually feel remiss that we haven't had you on before this, when it might have been under better circumstances. But anyway, they aren't better, and you are here, so we're grateful to have you. And listen, some of the things that we were going back and forth on some direct messaging this morning, and some other things I've seen you doing on the X, et cetera. You've been talking a lot about what you think Iran may do. And I wonder if you can just kind of walk us through what you think is the range of possibilities that Iran may do in retaliation.
Yeah, so great question. And of course, nobody really knows for sure. So I'll just preface it with that obvious statement. But, there's a whole range of things Iran can do. I think 100% they have to do something. If they didn't, that would be a threat to their regime, right? So for them, regime survival does require them to retaliate in some way, which sort of dovetails with what you just said. But there's a range of things that they can do. And it's not inevitable at this point that they retaliate against U.S. targets. And it's in Iran's best interest not to do that, right? It does not help Iran to draw the United States directly into this conflict with Israel. The United States is obviously a much, much more powerful country than Israel, can do a lot more harm to Iran than Israel can. So they have every incentive to have some restraint and not attack U.S. targets, broadly speaking, but particularly U.S. military targets in the region. There's some 40,000 troops deployed there, plus embassy staff's families. Not all of them were presumably able to evacuate before this strike occurred, so they're very much in harm's way. If President Trump plays his cards right, it's still, I think, possible to avoid retaliation against U.S. forces if he tries to make clear, and he has not been doing this so far, but if he tries to make clear that there is some space between the U.S. and Israel, that the U.S. is not about to join these attacks against Iran. It could be that restraint still prevails and that they don't attack U.S. forces. Iran could also attack other targets in the region. I think the likelihood of that is even lower, though, of them attacking U.S. targets. Other targets being countries that are friendly to the United States, other general oil industry targets in the region. Right, lots of people worry that Iran could try to attack, Saudi oil facilities or Gulf oil facilities more broadly to create a spike in oil prices that hurts the West. People over the years have worried, well, what if Iran tries to attack the Strait of Hormuz and close it to international shipping? Super huge question whether Iran has the capability to do that. It's not at all clear that they do. But I think those kinds of attacks are something that Iran is not likely to go for, because then it turns everybody in the region against Iran. Right now, Iran needs all the support it can get from other countries in the region. But they've had a rapprochement. Go ahead.
Here's one of the things that worries me about that is that if Israel's attack was finished right now and it was over, then there would be, I think, more room for that and less risk of them going down that path. What worries me is and Netanyahu has said this is apparently a multi-day operation, so presumably when the sun goes down tonight, more is coming. Are you concerned at all that the Iranian regime may get to a point to where, obviously a bunch of people were killed, a bunch of high-ranking people were killed last night, presumably more is coming. Can they get to the point to where they say, we have nothing to lose? There's no reason for us to restrain ourselves because otherwise we're all going to be destroyed. How worried are you about that?
Very, very worried. I think that their survival instinct is strong. And I don't think that they're going to go full on, we don't even care what happens to us. We just want to get back. I don't think they're going to go that route. But yes, right. At some point, if they decide that the United States is going to help Israel and the United States is not going to sit it out, then the incentive for Iran is to go against the United States hard, right? There's a perception around the world that the United States is a weak adversary. And this is something that the U.S. has overcompensated for by trying to look stronger around the world in ways that are quite stupid, right? But they might have the incentive to try to hit us really, really hard, thinking that we'll decide if we get high costs, it's not worth it to us, and we'll back off, right? So, I would hope there's some chance for restraint. But if they decide that's gone, right, and that the U.S. is basically, implicated anyway, or is going to attack Iran anyway, their smart move, which I certainly hope they don't do, would be to go hard against the United States to try to dissuade us from helping Israel further.
Now, what do you think that Iran will do? Because the Ayatollah said this is a declaration of war. Their president, which we showed at the top of this show here, said we will respond in a strong and powerful way. If they don't want, if they're focused on regime survival, and it seems like that would be the most likely of the two outcomes, then what can they do that would satisfy their claims that they're going to do something, but would not go so far as to precipitate something more, like especially with the U.S. joining in? Because it's hard for me to imagine anything that they could do that killed any Israeli people that would not again prompt another strike from Israel, which would then you're in a war. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, there's no good options here, right? There's no good options for anyone, frankly. There's no good options for Iran. And I would say it's not just about regime survival. It is about state survival from their standpoint, right? Sometimes what's good for the regime is not good for the country. But this is a case where the country as a whole, if it wants to continue to exist as a functioning country and not turn into a failed state, right, that interest is kind of very much in line with the regime's interest, right? So yeah, they're gonna hit back hard. I mean, if they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? If they don't, then they look bad internally, but it also allows Israel to hit them harder and harder and harder, right? If they do, it's going to incentivize Israel and possibly the United States to hit them harder and harder and harder. So yeah, I mean, this is a declaration of war. Like I've said it, and I think it's true that this is an equivalent in terms of a shock to the Iranian psyche. This is an equivalent to 9/11 for Iran, right? And it's not the same, but it's equivalent to that for them, right?
Well, yeah,
This
and
is going to cause a
something I wanted to
huge
go
rally
down.
around the flag effect.
You mentioned that earlier this morning.
Yeah.
That really got my attention because that has ramifications or implications, probably a better way to put it, because we all know what we felt on 9/11, and we certainly know what happened after that. And Gary showed you at this top of the show again, lots of protesters out there, or supporters rather, for Iran out there taken to the streets in the thousands of them. And so they clearly feel this very seriously. And in the United States, when it happens, everybody expected George Bush to do something to solve this problem here. One would imagine that these folks here that you're now seeing on the screen have some interest in their country doing something too. So it seems that the regime is in a really tough spot here because they can't do nothing, because then they're going to gain the anger of their internal population. But if they do something too big outside, then they risk even more. So how do they navigate that with 9/11 vibes going on inside?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. And I think that the Iranian regime overall is rational. I think that the United States has a bad habit of portraying our enemies as irrational or as crazy, just sort of in general, like Putin, crazy, Kim Jong-un, crazy, Iran, crazy, Houthis, crazy, Saddam Hussein, crazy, right? They're actually quite rational and self-preserving. That said, they're under enormous stress right now, right? The regime has been hobbled, right? Not destroyed by any stretch, but seriously hobbled, right? They are incapacitated, probably for a short term rather than a long term perspective. And I'm sure people are really emotional and angry, right? Now, like when your national survival is at stake or your regime survival is at stake, that has a way of focusing the mind and sort of putting rationality in front of you and making people sort of operate under pressure. But by the same token, when you find out that close confidants of Khamenei have been killed, that's going to cause an emotional reaction. It's going to make people mad, and it's going to make them want revenge, right? Which probably doesn't play to their own interests, but is also a very human impulse that's hard not to indulge.
Yeah. And by the way, just as a reminder, folks, be sure and like and subscribe. That really helps us out a lot during this. And we appreciate you guys being with us today. I want to go to a related topic here that Trump has also been talking a lot about today. And that he is still saying, I want to have a negotiated outcome with Iran. Now, I know you studied Iran a lot. You're the Middle East expert for defense priorities. Tell us a little bit about how you feel the mentality, especially with these 9/11 vibes going on and the anger inside. What is the chance that they come to the table now to negotiate? And apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood, they were willing to negotiate before on everything except no reprocessing. They said, we said that was a red line here of late. They said, we're not negotiating on that, but we will negotiate on these other things. Will they change their mind and negotiate on no reprocessing now?
No, zero chance, zero. Right? Because here's the thing. Trump leaned into the threat side of things, right? If you're trying to convince another country to do something you want them to do or not do, right? You have to threaten them with consequences if they don't do it. But then you also have to assure them that they won't pay the consequences if they do what you want them to do, right? That's the assurance problem. Like if I mug you by gunpoint, the assurance problem is I have to convince you that I'm not just going to shoot you after you give me your wallet, right? And that part, credibility of assurances, is completely gone from the United States, because we've basically shown them we don't control Israel, which we don't. Right? They would have been foolish if they ever thought we fully did, right? But we can't keep Israel at bay, right? So why are they going to trust any promise or pledge that we make to them? Even if we fully mean it in our deepest heart of hearts, and are willing to back it up, if we can't keep Israel on side and away from doing this, then it's worthless to Iran, right? And that's going to be devastating going forward in the region. It's possibly devastating for U.S. credibility of assurances going forward, right?
Well, then in the credibility of the negotiating process itself, because I mean, if President Trump goes down this path and actually tries to send, I don't know if he's going to send Witkoff back. I know they had a meeting that's already been canceled, but if there's any future ones that come up, and he can't rein in the Israeli side, as you say, and they're not willing to go to zero processing, i.e., our red line, then what? I mean, is it possible that the United States would then say, okay, well, then we're going to act on our claim of red line and bombs will be falling, et cetera? I mean, how does Trump get out of this Gordian knot?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, Trump is a political escape artist, right? This guy's Houdini. What's unfortunate about it is that he puts himself into boxes that then he has to escape from, right? Like, he creates bad situations, but then he miraculously escapes from them. So, like, it's possible Trump can somehow find a way to get out of this problem. I think this is going to test even his sort of expert escape artist capabilities in this case.
A political Houdini. That's an interesting analogy there.
Yeah. On both the causing the problem and getting out. But this is a problem that's going to be really hard to escape from, and it's going to haunt us for a long time. And this is I think your point is this is going to be a long conflict, right? Israel has sort of said it's going to go on for weeks. I mean, that's sort of like best case scenario from Israel, right? I think this is going to go on much longer than that.
Now, interesting dynamic here in terms about what we knew, what we didn't know, what our plans were, what level of coordination. There was a statement made by Volodymyr Zelensky last week, I think it was. And he was bemoaning about the fact he didn't have enough air defense missiles, whatever. And he said recently that 20,000 missiles that were promised by the previous administration for air defense, especially anti-drone stuff, were redirected recently to the Middle East. And there has been a lot of speculation that was in anticipation of Israel needing a bunch of those things. And so they had them redirected to give them to them. What does that tell you about whether we were or were not at least aware or helping Israel get ready for this?
It tells me about the sort of common human cognitive distortion of the, I forget what it's called, but it's the bias where you think that there's an intent to something that probably doesn't actually have an intent, right? Which is, I don't think that we can infer accurately from any of the stuff that's happened or will happen whether the United States actually gave Israel a green light to go forward, right? And I think that's going to be a question that historians are going to debate for 50 years at least and may never know the answer to, right? The significant thing here is that what's in whose interest going forward. So like it's in Israel's interest to suggest that the US was on side, that the US did know ahead of time, gave them a green light, et cetera, because Israel, not to be too cynical about it, but they want US help fighting Iran. And so if Iran retaliates against the United States, that's good for Israel, right? It's a place where Israeli interests and US interests are totally in opposition to one another, right? So Israel wants to suggest that the US was behind this, involved in this, moving pieces behind the scenes, right? The US should be playing down that possibility. Like we should be saying, or at least giving Iran political cover to pretend to believe that we were not the architect of this, or we were not behind this, if the US wants to avoid getting retaliated against by Iran. Sadly, Trump does not seem to be doing that. I think that, his own sort of, ego sort of personality quirks are such that he wants to boast, he wants to brag. He sees what looks like a short-term massive military success for Israel. I don't think it's going to be a success in the long term. In the short term looks pretty good. And he's like, yeah, I was behind that. I want to claim credit. But I think that impulse is actually going to really hurt US interests because we have no interest in claiming credit for this, right? Because we have no interest in getting drawn into this war.
Certainly, there had been some rumors, or at least some reports, sketchy reports, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, that apparently the Trump administration was starting to quietly move a lot of our troops out of Syria. Do you have any inside information about whether that's accurate or not? And whether it is or not, what do you think the chances are now that we would remove our troops from Syria?
I mean, I'll say I think we should remove our troops from Syria. I think that was the case before, because I think, like you've said, they're sitting ducks for no good reason. And that's even more the case now. I don't know, I don't have information on that I can share, or that I know about like what's really sort of going on, or what the intent is. I think the situation is so fluid that anything could happen, right? We could put more troops in Syria. We could take all our troops out of Syria. It's just really unclear at this point. If we're wise, we should use it as an excuse to get out. But I don't know if we'll be wise. And, this is a president that doesn't ever want to look weak. And unfortunately, withdrawing for some people looks weak, even if it's the smart thing to do. It's not necessarily weak.
I could come up with a scenario in this environment to where this is the absolute perfect time to withdraw, because now you can say, well, now we don't need them anymore, because some had always claimed, well, they're there in case we ever have to get into war with Iran and, to help Israel. Well, now Israel has, taken that issue and now it's in the past tense. So there's no more need for them. Now it's time to bring them victoriously home. I mean, I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah, me too. And same with the troops in Iraq, which are in even more jeopardy, given the closer proximity to Iran than the ones in Syria.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had not thought about the geographic locations there as well. And let's in the last section we have before we let you go, let's take a look at the Israeli part of this equation here. What does Israel have to gain from this? Neftali Bennett has been talking about this as a once in a 50-year opportunity. Obviously, many have been echoing that throughout the Israeli government. Without question, Netanyahu has been trying to pressure Trump to join him with this. Fortunately, he, at least so far, didn't do that. So that's one positive thing. But what is Israel's play here? What is their expected end state that they have that they want to achieve here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Israel is taking a gamble. I worry that they're susceptible to victory disease, because they've had, after this massive attack in October 7th, 2023, they've had a string of victories, and it may have made them a little bit cocky about what they can accomplish. But I think ultimately, if you're Israel and your sort of view is that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, right? But you realize, as they should, that it's actually militarily impossible to prevent them from getting one, then I think what Israel really wants to have happen is regime change in Iran, right? Either regime change in Iran, or you turn Iran into a failed state, because those are the two end states that might prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, right? If the current regime stays in power, 100%, they're going to race to get a bomb. That is what I would do. I would race to get a bomb and have a nuclear test to try to get Israel to back off, right? Israel has to understand that that's what Iran's going to do, that they need a deterrent more than they ever did before, right? So Israel has every incentive to wreck Iran as a functioning state, or bring about, a more friendly government that somehow embraces democracy or whatever. I don't think the Israelis are dumb enough to believe that would actually happen.
Well, let's look at that before we get. I don't want you to get too far away from it, because that's kind of a big deal. That may be the most central issue to discuss here.
Yeah,
what is the possibility that Iran now races to a bomb? Because on the surface, it looks like that Israel, they struck Natanz, they struck Isfahan, and I'm not sure the whole target list, but clearly they've hit a lot of the things that were where they had did a reprocessing, et cetera. Now, the expectation is that Iran has long foreseen this, and that have deeply buried in underground bunkers, et cetera, other capabilities. The question is, with the damage that's done on the surface, do they have the ability to race to a bomb underneath the surface?
I mean, no one really knows, but my guess is probably yes. I mean, let's assume the maximalist best case scenario for Israel, that they got everything, right? Probably didn't get everything. There's probably sites and stockpiles they didn't know about. There's probably ones that have survived and will survive the attacks, et cetera. Even if Israel gets everything, right? Iran is a country that's been enriching uranium for over 20 years. They have a vast, diverse, indigenous nuclear capacity. They have a generation or more of scientists who understand how to enrich uranium to weapons grade material, right? They are going to be able to rebuild and enrich uranium to weapons grade material, right? They're going to be able to do that. And they have every incentive to do it now. The question that was never clear, and their breakout time was essentially at zero. The thing is, it's been at zero for at least 3 years since 2022, and they didn't get a bomb, which suggests to me they were not going to get one. The only question here is, can they assemble a bomb with the material that they can produce? And we don't know. The most recent intelligence estimates from the United States has been it would take them another 6 months to a year to do that. That's assuming normal peacetime circumstances. It's not assuming that Iran has just been attacked and might see this as the last chance it has for survival as a functioning state. So it's possible they could do it more quickly. Nobody really knows.
Well, I fear we may find out. We'll see.
Yeah.
But that's the bottom line. And I guess last question I got for you. What is the most likely, I guess, case for Israel? If Iran does any version of backing down, and even if it's with some demonstrative retaliation that at least satiates the 9/11 just inside of Iran so that they don't turn on the regime, but then they say, all right, you've destroyed our capability. We don't have a nuclear weapon. We don't even have the capability anymore. So, okay, fine. We're just going to stand down because that's all we can do. And then this period here ends, this campaign, whatever ends, but the Iranian regime is still in place. What is Israel's play then? Because how's that going to affect their medium-term security?
Oh, it's going to be terrible for their security. I mean, this is, I think right now, based on how tactically successful this operation has been, people are sort of riding high on the implications for Israel. But I think the medium to long-term implications are extremely bad, right? I don't see what the theory of victory is here for Israel. And they have this war going on in Gaza that's been going on for almost 2 years, where there's no clear theory of victory either, right? So it's kind of their MO to start these wars that they don't know how to finish, right? And just sort of continue doing them for whoever, who knows how long, right? That's going to drain Israel, right? Israel is a small country, right? It is not a big country. It is much smaller than any of these other countries in the region. It's, super well armed, super high tech, all that kind of stuff. But if you just look at the numbers side of things, it can't fight an ongoing war of attrition with all of its neighbors for years. Like, it just can't, even with US help. So I don't see how this ends in a good way for Israel or anybody in the region. And it's really very upsetting.
Yeah, and I do worry about that. One of our viewers here says that Iranian air defenses are now back up and working. So potentially, if there are further strikes, there might be some responses. I don't know. We'll have to wait. I hadn't seen any information on that. Thanks for passing that along. But listen, really, really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your insights into here. Been very, very illuminating, and our audience is quite happy to have it. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Danny. Have a good one.
And thank you guys too. And of course, we're going to continue to keep a track on this stuff. We're going to look later this afternoon at I guess it's first of all at 2 p.m. We're gonna also expand out to, there's things happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. We don't want to lose sight of that too. And we're gonna have one of our favorite guests, Alexander Mercurius, is going to be on to talk about that. But they'll also talk about some of these issues here, especially any developments between now and then. And the situation is developing this fast. There's always new things that are going to happen. At 3 p.m., we're going to have Harry Kazianis back, or Harry Kaz, as he's now known. And we've had him on a time or two before. More information on that later, but he's going to be talking about what's going on at the international and national level, because there's issues with some of the Arab regimes in the region and some of the things that they have said about this. There's even some European responses and things that France, Germany, and the UK, which had already been having a negative view towards some of the things of the Netanyahu government related to the Gaza war. They were some of the ones that were trying to help with the nuclear deal, the JCPOA that we had before. And we're going to see what is the implication of all this. How are they standing on all this? And where is this going at the strategic level? You won't want to miss that one at 3 p.m. this afternoon with Harry Kaz, and at 2 p.m. with Alexander Mercurius. In the meantime, we'll look forward to seeing you guys at the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.